Alright everyone, hello. I am going to show you how to do a fairly simple painting today. It's a nice spring painting. It's just kind of a sunrise or sunset over a lake with some mountains or hills in the background. We're not using any really complicated techniques here, so just kind of dig in and see what you create. In your kit you're going to find a canvas, two different sized paintbrushes, and you're also going to find the colors that we're using today. So we've got a nice bright purple and a pink, black and white, and that's all of the colors that we'll need today. I would also suggest that you have handy something to cover your workspace. I'm working with a plastic tablecloth today, but you could use a garbage bag or old newspaper, whatever you have handy. Also have available for yourself a cup of water to rinse off your paintbrushes, as well as some paper towels to dry those paintbrushes and wipe off any excess paint. Alright, we are going to get started here. I'm going to mostly use our 1-inch flat brush today. So I'm just going to set my other paintbrush aside. I'm going to start by getting this flat brush just a little bit wet. And then I want to make sure that the excess water comes off of the brush. We don't want it to be too wet. So then once I've got it out of the water cup, I'm going to blot it onto a paper towel here. So it's damp but not soaking. And today we are going to start with our white paint, kind of making a line through the middle of our canvas. And then we're going to use that line as our horizon point to make our sky and our lake, and we're going to blend some other colors in. So let's get started. Just coat your brush in that white paint. Find about the middle, it doesn't have to be perfect, of your canvas and glide it across. It is okay to coat this canvas in the white paint. I know white on white, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but this will help us as we blend other colors in. So you do want to lay it on kind of thick here. And like I said, it doesn't have to be exact. We are going to cover up this white with other colors. So there we are. Then go ahead and rinse off your brush. And again, you're going to blot that on your paper towel. And then we're going to move to using pink. Pink is an odd color for a sunrise or sunset, but it's one of my favorites to see in the sky. Right, now this is a very bright pink, so when we're mixing it with the white, it's going to do some work for us in kind of lightening it up. But we do want to leave just a little bit of white shining through. So come to about a third of the way down into your white paint and go ahead and draw that right across. And you can see it's getting lighter as we go across here. Okay, so carry that over. There we are. And we're going to do just about the same thing going towards the bottom. Okay, but leave that small space of white paint in the center. Right, you do want to make sure that you're coating the entire canvas all the way across here. Great. And then moving pretty quickly so that we don't get too much dry space, we're just going to, we're going to do just a little bit more pink, and then we're going to blend that in with some dark purple. Right, so a little bit more pink at the top and the bottom. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to blend this with other colors. There we are. Alright, so now make sure that you thoroughly rinse your brush off. That pink does tend to stick. And we're going to switch to purple. You don't want to take too long cleaning off your brush because we still want the paint on the canvas to be nice and wet. Alright, so into purple. I'm going to carry this purple color all the way to the top of the canvas, and we're going to bring it all the way down to the bottom as well. Now your canvas is fairly thin, but you do want to make sure that you're kind of getting the edges along the top, bottom, and sides painted so that when you're displaying it, you're not just getting white at the edges. Right, go. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom here. And all the way down. Right, now we are working with some pretty vibrant colors and they haven't blended quite as well as I would like them to. So at this point I'm going to go back through with some pink and see if I can't get that pink and purple to mix a little bit. But if yours has turned out just the way that you want it, feel free to leave it be. Alright, that looks a little more like I had intended. It's definitely a gradient there. We do want it to be the nice light color meeting the white background, so that's wonderful. I'm going to do the same thing here at the bottom. Just going to give our purple a little bit to get it wet, and then go back through with our white, or our pink rather. Right, so mostly we just don't want to see this really stark line of color. We want it to be mixed together pretty well. But it also doesn't have to be perfect. There's a lot of beauty in imperfections. Right, you notice I haven't been paying much attention to the bottom, and that's because we're going to be covering this up with actually black here, so we're going to leave that kind of be. What I do want to do is just a little touch of white here to lighten that first section up. This is just where the horizon is meeting some water. I want to make it look pretty light. It's just the first rays of sun in the morning. Good, that really got it blended together pretty well. Alright, now you can let this set for just a minute to get it a little drier. What we're going to do next is actually take this line of white and we're going to cover over most of it with black mountains or hills, depending on how high you want to go. So we're just going to leave the barest hint of white there so that you can see the difference between the actual hill or mountain and then what is being reflected in the lake at the bottom. So this is our sky, this is our lake. We're going to make just a landmass here at the horizon line, and we just want this little itty bitty line of definition between actual land and what's being reflected in the water. Alright, so now for this mountain side, I am going to switch to the smaller flat brush, just so we can get a little more precision. You can absolutely use the 1-inch flat brush if you would like. You just have to be very delicate about it, which is why I'm switching to the smaller brush. Alright, so like I said, we're going to leave just this very small line of white at the horizon line to differentiate between actual mountain and what's being reflected. So I would suggest to you starting with the actual mountainside that you want to create. And you can make it as large or as small as you like. For me, I want to focus on the sunrise. So I'm going to make these hills not too terribly large. So mostly I'm going to start off here with my line of black all the way across. You can make it as thick as you need to, and you can always go back over it to make it larger. And I am terrible about straight lines. You won't see any of those in my work. So if you're a perfectionist, more power to you for the straight line. Alright, so there's my line. Now I want to go above that line to make hills. And these aren't going to be very defined. It's just giving our lake some dimension and parameters. I'm going to start over here on the right hand side. And honestly, some of this is going to get covered over by our foreground as well. So if you mess up, quote unquote, don't worry about it too much. You do want to make sure, like this, you can still see the pink coming through. You want to make sure that that black paint is going down thick enough to really cover up the pink behind it. Okay. Don't have much tutorial to give you on hills, just, rises and falls in your landscape here. You can do varied heights, you can do one giant hill, totally up to you. Right now, kind of at the center point, or the inner third of our painting. So if you take the two sides and you really just focus on the center portion, we kind of want to leave that sort of blank. We want our focus to be on the horizon. So if you are going to put bigger hills, kind of leave that center space a little flatter. Not completely flat, but not to distract from what's happening in the rest of the painting. And again, make sure you're using enough black paint that you're not seeing the color behind that. Right. Again, I haven't been very precise here. Mountains don't have straight lines, so your painting shouldn't either. I am going to go through and just make sure to touch up any areas where I can see through the black paint. It's a problem that I typically run into if I'm doing something that's kind of delicate, is that I don't use enough paint. Alright, so we'll let that dry and see how it turns out. So now we're going to focus on its reflection in the lake below. So again, we want to leave just a very skinny white line in between the mountain and its reflection. And remember too that the reflection does not have to be perfect. The surface of our water is not necessarily this perfectly smooth thing where it reflects 100% accuracy, so you can make it kind of wavy and not too big. I will just say try to get the scale similar, so if you've done something small here, make sure that the reflection is kind of small. If it's bigger, to make sure that the reflection is bigger. Alright, I'm actually going to start on this left-hand side so I'm not dragging my hand through wet paint. Right, and I think that I have made this white line just a little too thick, so I'm going to go back through and close up that gap just a little bit. That looks a little better. Right, so again, it's not a perfect reflection, but you get a general sense that what's happening above is also happening below. just going to go through and do a few touch-ups. I see at least one spot where our white didn't blend in and didn't get covered up, and then I'm going to close up that line just a little bit in a few sections here. And again, you can go back through and put more black paint down anywhere that you see color shining through that. It wasn't applied thickly enough. Alright, I think we'll leave that to dry for just a minute, and when it does dry it might look a little different, so we might need to do a few more touch-ups. Alright, so while we let this sort of center dry, we're going to work on the land that the viewer of the painting is standing on, and that's just going to be this bottom little swath down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make it look a little bowed in, as if you're giving your lake some dimension to it. But you can choose to make it a flat line if you wish. Totally up to you. We're going to do maybe like an inch and a half worth of black down here at the bottom, and then we're going to put in a couple of trees and a dock, if you would like. So this is the local swimming hole, and we'll go from there. But I am going to switch back to our 1-inch brush, just because we're going to be doing so much black at once. Alright, so as you can see, that was not really a fine-tuned application here. I did just bring up the corners on either side here to give it kind of that bow shape. And remember too that the line does not need to be perfectly straight or perfectly flat. There's no way that you can mess this up. You can have a little piece sticking out there. Very few shorelines are just perfect. Alright, so we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to add to it. We're going to put a tree. I'm going to do a tree on each side. So like I said, we wanted to leave that center third of the painting kind of free. That's where we're going to put our dock for swimming. There's going to be a tree on either side of our painting here. And we're not going to spend too much time on those trees. We're just going to make them pretty, you know, early spring or summer. Nothing too fancy. So now we're just going to wait for this paint to dry before we get started. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started by making our first tree here. I'm going to switch back to the thinner paintbrush for this. It doesn't have to be a very large tree. Just going to make the trunk kind of come up here and then have the branches just above kind of the mountains in the background. The thing I love about trees, again, no straight lines. There's very little way that you can mess up. It might not turn out the way that you had expected. That doesn't make it any less beautiful. Right, and as you're painting your trunk, I'm just doing kind of small strokes up, and then make sure that you're leaving space for branches to come off. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need a few. And you do want to kind of make it so that your branches are coming up over top of the mountains so that they actually have some definition to them. Black on black painting doesn't turn out so well. You need some contrast. Alright, so we've got some trees, limbs, a few branches. You can probably fill that in just a little bit more here. Some coming off of each of those. That way, this doesn't really matter which direction they're going. Alright. And then we're going to kind of cover this with leaves. And the way that we're going to make leaves is pretty simple. We're just going to dab them on there. But before we do that, we're going to let this kind of set and dry, and we're going to do another tree on this side. You can make it larger, you can make it smaller, but again, you don't want all of the leaves to be centered right around where the mountains are going. So I'm actually going to make this tree come all the way up to the top of this side of the painting. A little thicker at the base because it's going to be a little taller and it needs to support that weight. Again, you just don't want to forget your branches. And for this one, I want to actually bring a few of the branches down just a little bit lower too. Just so that we don't have this really skinny tree. There's really not a whole lot of rhyme or reason on where I place these branches, just that it kind of support the view of the tree. It kind of fills in as we get our leaves. And a few of these branches have probably extended too far, but that's okay. We'll just suspend reality for a little while we're looking at this painting. Alright, and now I'm just kind of going through and touching up any of the branches that don't have quite enough paint. This is not such a big deal because, again, we're going to be covering this up with leaves. I'm going to do that over here as well. Alright, so now we're going to switch over to our 1-inch brush and we're going to give this leaves. If you have watched my other video creating kind of our winter scene, we just kind of dab black paint all over where there are branches, and we expect it to turn out pretty well. And honestly, on the whole, I think that it will. So with your 1-inch brush, you want to make sure that it gets kind of dry, honestly, because we want the bottom of the brush to be splotchy. Alright, so taking our 1-inch brush, we just want to place it directly down into some black paint. And then we're going to use it as kind of a stamp on our leaves. So let's start up here at the very top. We're just going to tap it kind of all over the place. And then when you feel like your stamp has run out of ink, you go back for just a little bit more paint. Okay? So this is just kind of giving us more the impression of leaves than actually drawing each individual leaf on our painting. And it's up to you, but this white line you might want to kind of cover in a little bit over your trees. Might be just a little bit distracting, but again, totally up to you. And like I said, this painting is for kind of early spring, summer, so your leaves don't have to be big. We do want to fill it out for the entirety of the tree. Right, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're just going to dab leaves wherever there are branches. And you want to make sure that you get it all the way over to the side as well. And there's really no certain direction that they all have to be going or anything like that. Just dab away. Again, you want to bring just a few of the leaves down below the line of the horizon, just to kind of fill it out. And really you get to decide for yourself when you are done. You can make these leaves and trees just as full or sparse as you like. I'm going to say that's probably pretty good for me. Alright, so now I'm going to set aside this large brush again, and I'm going to switch back to the smaller one. What we're going to do now is give the land at the bottom of the painting some grass. Early spring, this is a pond, there are probably some weeds around, so we're just going to kind of swipe very small little pieces of grass or hay or whatever you want to call it up from the bottom of the painting into the water area, just to give it a little bit of a wild feel. Okay, but you don't want to use too much paint here. So again, just swipe. And it doesn't have to be precise. It can be a little hazy. Alright, so I'm going to do that for the edges. And the last big thing that we have to make is our dock for swimming. Now, if you don't want to include the dock, that's totally fine if you think it's going to kind of impede your painting. It's a totally optional addition. I am going to include it because I think that this is just like the perfect setting for a little swimming hole. Alright, so if you don't want to include the dock, go ahead and fill in that bottom area with little grass wisps. But if you do want to include the dock, it's fairly simple. We're just going to make 2 lines to make kind of a square, but they're going to be slanted just a little bit for our perspective. So on the left hand side, we're going to draw a line that is tilted towards the center, okay? Doesn't have to be a real steep angle, just like that. And we don't want it to come out too far. We're going to do the same on the other side. It's going to be tilted, angled in the opposite direction. Right, so it gets a little wider the closer that it comes to you, the person viewing the painting. Alright, that looks pretty good. And then we're going to do just a very, as straight as you can, line to connect these two together. Here we go. Alright, and then you're just going to fill that in with black paint. Do try to stay inside the lines that you have drawn. This is one of those, it's a man-made thing, not a nature thing, so those do tend to have more precise lines. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. So then I'm just going to bring in those grass pieces to meet up with that duck. Alright, now our leaves are still drying a little bit. You can see this beautiful sunrise in between each of the leaves. We've got our dock, we've got our grass here. I think that we're just about ready to call this done. The very last thing that I would say is that if one of your branches happen to come out into the water area, you could build for yourself a little swing. That could look really picturesque, or maybe a bench if you choose. I'm going to leave it as is because I think it looks pretty great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed creating this masterpiece and that you share with us how yours turned out in the comments. Have a great day.